All right, everyone. Yesterday, suspicions were confirmed that the 737, the Ukrainian one that took off out of Tehran during the strikes that were ongoing at the U.S. Bases in Iraq, it was shot down, it appears, by the Iranians by an anti-air system, a surface-to-air missile. They managed to recover a chunk of it, and they're saying that that's probably what was responsible. The initial photos that we got did appear to show what was shrapnel injuries to the outside of the aircraft. I think everyone aboard died, and it was mostly Iranians and people from Ukraine and Canada. All civilians, terrible. There's a lot of propaganda going on right now around it, though. Some of these people, again, not naming names, but some commentators saying, no, this could never happen. It had to have been the United States that was at fault for it. I'm trying to envision a scenario in which the United States has managed to actually commandeer a surface-to-air missile inside of downtown Tehran in order to pull that off. And I'm drawing a blank as to whether that's possible. I'm thinking probably it's more of a fog of war mistake. And another reason that I can accept the semi-official story, which is that Iran accidentally shot it down in the fog of war, is because it doesn't really benefit the West at all. Maybe as far as optics go, but it's not a cause for war. It's not going to cause the United States to have a reason to march into Tehran or something. If it were a situation where, it happened, the Iranians all of a sudden brought down several jetliners, they just happened to be totally full of Americans, including diplomats or something, then it becomes suspicious, it becomes fishy. If it's just a 737 from Ukraine of all places that takes off, I don't know why they decided to greenlight them taking off, number one, where there were these struggle ongoing. Number two, I'm not understanding how that could possibly drag the U.S. in. Like Trudeau, a lot of the people aboard were Canadians. Trudeau is the least likely person in all of the world's leadership to even possibly greenlight anything as far as repercussions. He won't even greenlight sanctions against the Iranians. The Ukrainian government is far too weak and embattled at the moment to do butt-fuck anything, let alone about a nation like Iran would probably lose in an engagement against Iran quite handily. Therefore, the bottom line is I can accept the sort of official status quo story. And I don't do that all the time because you understand the U.S. government does occasionally do false flags and then lie about it. But you got to look at what the purpose for the false flag would actually be. Here there is none. So what would the point be of bringing down the jetliner? Again, risk versus reward informs human actions, and this tends to be extrapolated to the political field too. A state is not typically going to undergo extremely risky actions without a high potential payoff. The risk of bringing down a civilian jetliner as a potential act of war in another state would be quite high. Even if you think that the likelihood of being detected doing so is relatively low, the risk is extremely high, and there's no payoff, so I can't understand why the U.S. would get involved. But there are still some people who believe that the Iranian government's shit don't stink, so to speak, that believe that everything boils down to Western man bad, U.S. bad, that are desperately trying to figure out how this is somehow Trump's fault as well. It's funny to see them say that, like, well, this wouldn't have happened at all if Trump hadn't killed Soleimani. Well, playing that same game, Soleimani wouldn't have been killed if not for various problems that Iran was undergoing over the last few years towards Western assets, like, for instance, taking ships hostage or things like that. And then further beyond that, well, Iran wouldn't have taken your ship hostage or attacked your embassy if you hadn't occupied Iraq in 2003 and ousted Saddam and stuff like that. And then you could say, well, that wouldn't have happened if, and you can go all the way back. You can go back before the initial ouster of the government there in the 1950s. You can even go back before that. Well, that wouldn't have happened if the Nazis hadn't realized that occupying the Middle East was a great way to throttle their enemies because it was a main energy resource and a choke point for world trade. Well, that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for those commies. Well, that wouldn't have happened if not for the Volkish movements. Well, that wouldn't... You can go all the way back probably 10,000 fucking years along that chain of reasoning. So, I don't really care about that. A lot of people seem to, and really it boils down to a recency bias where artificial importance is given to one of two things. either the embassy and Iran or Soleimani and act of war. Well, again, that doesn't actually make a war. If every act of war, or potential act of war, were taken as a war and were extrapolated from and turned into a larger fight, World War III already would have broken out and we'd already be dead. Now, I don't really think that killing Soleimani accomplishes much of anything. That being said, it also doesn't bring us to the brink of Armageddon. And watching people like Gabbard or Sanders and some of these people, or some of the Iranian authorities, some mainline commentators online, worry about World War III or escalation even at this point, the situation has been de-escalated. The biggest thing that we're talking about is that Iran mistakenly, accidentally brought down a civilian jetliner. That's not going to cause a war with the United States. And as far as I'm concerned, look, I'm an American. I deal with the U.S. and I'm living in the Netherlands, so with Northwestern Europe broadly. I don't care about the Iranians having done this. I don't feel any animus towards the Iranians, have no problem with Iran. I understand that the leadership there is brutal and authoritarian and highly theocratic, and of course I think organized religion tends to poison what it touches. But that's not really my problem, and them accidentally bringing down a plane isn't my problem either. Them striking the base is kind of my problem, but again, I'm not over there, nobody was harmed. Okay, let's put it past us. Instead of making this yet another grisly milestone in a world policing grand chessboard scheme, and making it another sort of memorial moment about what's wrong in the world, just fucking get past it. Realize that shit happens. Yeah, sometimes people fire rockets. Like, again, and my prediction was proven correct less than 24 hours after the strikes, when I said that every time now, for at least the next few weeks, that someone fires a fucking bottle rocket in Baghdad, you'll hear about it on the international news. It'll be taken, and some people say, well, World War III is actually beginning. Look, they're firing rockets at your base. Okay, an unguided, no warhead rocket gets fired at something. What's it going to do? What are the fucking odds that it actually hits anything meaningful, and what are the odds it damages it? If you're talking about military-grade infrastructure, those things will bounce right off. Nobody fucking gives a shit. So it's sad for the families of those who died, and the Ukrainian government and presumably the Canadian government have grievances. I think the CN Tower was blacked out, and they lowered their flags to half staff. But I mean, is Canada going to invade Tehran? I don't think so. At this point, I don't think the U.S. would be willing to go in as well. If like Canada, imagine that Canada and Ukraine mobilize and they're like, oh, you fucked up now. The Maple Horse dudes are going to come after you. I don't know. I don't think that that's going to happen, though. Thankfully, it looks like war was averted. That's a good thing. There are some people that appear to be upset about that fact. That's really sad. That's about all. Peace out.